As a young child, the Czech language was all Julie Sedovy knew. Then her family moved from what was then Czechoslovakia through Austria, Italy, and finally East Montreal. She learned French from kids in the neighborhood, but started school in English.
It was implicitly clear to me, even as a child, that English was the most prestigious language to speak, that it was the language in which things got done, the language of serious people, the language of education.
This was in the 1970s when almost all immigrants in Quebec chose to have their kids educated in English, like Sedovy's parents did. But the French speakers of Quebec felt their culture and language threatened by the pull of English in multicultural Canada. So Quebec officials took action.
Quebec put in place a set of language laws that would prohibit immigrants like my family from educating their children in English. After a certain time, they were only allowed to send their kids to school in French.
The government's language laws also required all business signs and brochures to be in French, even wine lists and menus. These rules were enforced by Quebec's language enforcement agency, nicknamed the Language Police. This enraged some of Quebec's minority Anglophones and frustrated Sedovy. Even as a kid, she saw how English could be used like a currency to win acceptance and approval.
Certain extended family members had their choice of language curtailed by those language laws. I think it sort of shifted the assumptions about which language was most useful and most valuable. Now all of a sudden you became very handicapped. If you didn't speak French, it became harder to find a job.
But now she understands why the government did this. Sedovy is a writer and a cognitive scientist who specializes in languages. When her dad died, she realized how much she missed her native Czech tongue.
I'm now more aware of the fact that a dominant language like English really has the potential to steamroll over minority languages unless something is done to bolster the status of some of those weaker or smaller languages.
The language laws did help preserve French in Quebec, and younger generations aren't as concerned that the language will die out now.
I've discovered a changed landscape.
Dan Bilevsky also grew up in Montreal. He lived abroad for 28 years, but recently returned as a New York Times correspondent.
The cultural wars of the past have largely dissipated, and the younger generation is much more interested in being the next Quebecois Bill Gates than in revisiting the atavistic linguistic arguments of the past.
In contemporary Quebec hip-hop, you hear a lot of language mixing. Take the francophone rap group Dead Obies.
We just getting started, get captivated. Looking at me now, thinking now they made it. Step up is about being Falcon famous. Can make more shit. What the hell my name is got tons.
Or the comedian Sugar Sam, who jokes in both French and English.
All right, welcome to the Illegal English Edition. OK, fait qu'on va faire ça en français, là.
In his routines, he often jokes about language.
You have a French accent, no? You're practicing your French accent? While speaking English? You don't need to do that, man.
But you can still find some language purists in Quebec. Sugar Sam's critics have called him a francophobe federalist bully and a traitor. Quebec legislators recently told shopkeepers to stop saying
Bonjour, hi.
An Italian restaurant in Montreal faced the ire of the language police for saying
polpette
instead of
boulette de viande
and
pasta
instead of
pâte.
The language laws in Quebec are always bubbling underneath the surface, and every so often they wheel their heads.
Some efforts to preserve secular French culture take more extreme forms. A little over a decade ago, the rural Quebec village of Aéroville introduced a code of conduct for immigrants. The code explained that people in the village enjoyed dancing, music, and Christmas trees. But some rules could also be seen as extremely Islamophobic, like warnings against stoning women in public and burning them alive. Bilevsky visited that village for a New York Times piece last year.
Really, many people who I spoke to were quite unrepentant about this code of conduct, thought it was a good thing, and thought that immigrants who come to Quebec really do need to assimilate and integrate to local norms.
When Bilevsky thinks of lingering cultural battles over Quebec's identity, he's reminded of two sculptures near the old port of Montreal. One is of a French woman wearing a Chanel suit and clasping a poodle. On the other side, an Englishman holds a pug.
Their dogs, the poodle and the pug, are staring longingly at each other.
Meanwhile, the two statues, one French, one English, look away. Bilevsky says these statues symbolize Quebec's two enduring solitudes. For what it's worth, these statues are also known as the two snobs. For Philosophy Talk, I'm Holly J. McDede.